Welcome back, everyone, to Introduction to Psychology 1. Now, before we pick up where we left off, which was at talking about pseudoscience, I realized that I think we skipped over something last lecture that's important. We were talking about the definition of psychology, and if I remember correctly, your textbook defined it as the study of human mind, brain, and behavior. And we talked about what's a mind and how's that connected to the brain. It's not something the ancient Egyptians, not a connection the Egyptians made, but in modern psychology, we believe that your mind is a function of your brain. And then there was the last one. I don't think we talked about that, and that was behavior. And that's important. And it's so important that I wrote it on the board behind me. So what is behavior? What does that mean? It's not the same thing as mind. It's connected, of course. Yes, it is, as Jacob suggested. It's about actions. Yeah, and actions that are repeated and typical become habits. And the actions can be a response to circumstances, can be a reaction to many different things. They could be a reaction to your thoughts. But the point is that it's an observable action. So now one student suggested attitude, and I'm going to say no, because I would have to infer your attitude from your actions. So your actions are something that I can watch, I can record with a camera, I can count the number of them on a clipboard. They have some kind of operational definition of an action. And one of those might be smiling. I can count the number of times you smile. I can train my research assistants to count the number of times you smile. Now, we have to operationally define what a smile is, because, is that a smile? How much of this muscle do you have to use before we say, yeah, that's a smile? So smiling is a behavior, and I can make an inference from that about your feelings or your thoughts. I could, seeing you smile, infer that therefore you are happy. Is that necessarily true? Chance seems to be saying no. It's probably a pretty good guess. I mean, maybe a lot of smiling people are happy people. It's a good heuristic, good rule of thumb, but I'm seeing a lot of no's, and why not? It's a maybe. Yeah. So as Vern said, you might just be uncomfortable. Smiling is also a submissive gesture. And so submissive people smile more because it's pleasing to the dominant person. So you're feeling uncomfortable, and you want to get me on the right side of you, so you smile at me. It's an appeasement gesture as well. Okay, so it could just mean that you are uncomfortable and in the submissive portion. And you could be fake smiling. You could be grimacing with pain. So I'm making inferences about your mind, that sort of black box that's in your head, from your behavior. But behavior is about actions and observable actions. All right. So on to our discussion of pseudoscience. So psychology is a science. It's empirical. We use a systematic approach to knowledge. And then there are disciplines that we would call pseudoscientific. Pseudo means like. It seems scientific, but it's really not. And there's this odd picture from your textbook there, like with the highway signs. I don't really know what the artist was going for there. But they give examples like numerology and fortune teller and fortune telling. Why would they call those pseudosciences? Why isn't astrology a science? A lot of people are into astrology, right? A lot of people are into their star sign, and I'm a Virgo. Yeah. So as Emily said, they can't be falsified. And so the way it works with astrology is someone makes a prediction, and then it doesn't pan out. There's some kind of explanation for it. So You know, maybe because I'm a Virgo, you'd expect that I'd be, I don't know. But, and it doesn't pan out. We can say, well, you know, when you were born, actually, that's Mercury was in retrograde, and that made the opposite thing happen. See, that's what was going on. See, astrology is still right. So it's unfalsifiable. I see a lot of messages flying by, and I'm going to read them quickly. Another point about falsifiability. No scientific evidence. So there have been scientific tests of astrology, and they have not panned out. So there's a body of research on that. Could it be because of lack of research? No, it's more that when you do the research, we don't care if it disproves the theory. We just keep using it anyway because we like it. And there is pseudoscience within psychology, right? There's many forms of therapy that have never been tested that we use anyway. The learning styles, have you heard about learning styles? Like, are you a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinetic learner? You've probably heard that many times. That's very popular in psychology. It has been debunked so many times, but it's warm and fuzzy and we like it and we keep using it. Okay, so pseudoscience and psychology as well. And most forms of therapy have never been tested. I'm just reading through your comments. Yeah. Okay. So I think you have the idea there that the biggest point is it's not falsifiable. And when it is falsified, we don't care and keep using it. And there's a question there about chiropractors. And the picture there is of the chiropractic clinic that I go to because I have a chiropractor. So I do use some there's pseudoscientific practices in my life because I like them. And I do go to a chiropractor and I enjoy his adjustments. But I also know that when he starts talking about his adjustments improving my diabetes, that he's full of it, right? I know that I'm not going to get off insulin because of something he does in his office. And another thing I know is that there are some folks who have been seriously and permanently injured or who have died because of chiropractic adjustments to the neck. Okay, like there's a lot of important stuff in your neck. And so I'm probably going to stop letting him do that because it's really not worth the risk. But all the other stuff seems, I don't know, I kind of feel better afterwards. So yeah, chiropractic doesn't have a strong evidence base to it. I have a friend who's into aromatherapy, and I don't have it with me right now, but once I went to this essential oil store with her and made a blend of oils that I use when I feel stressed out to ground me, and I enjoy that very much. I don't really care if that's scientifically validated or not. So this clicker keeps not working. Oh, it just had a delay. All right, so one of the things we referenced there was the fact that it's not falsifiable. And they have a really, that's a $5 word, ad hoc immunizing hypothesis. That's just the idea that when the test doesn't work out, we have another explanation that covers for it. And there's a lady named Jasmuheen who is a breatharian. And she teaches that you don't need to eat food or drink water. You can get your energy from prana, which is some kind of an energy, comes from the sun. And 5 people have died following her teaching. She writes books, she does seminars, she's been practicing for a long time. I think I probably first heard about her in around 2000, and she's still out there. And at one point, some investigative journalists thought they'd sort of test her breatharian hypothesis. Now, what she will say is that she does not need food to live, but that sometimes she gets bored and kind of gets a taste of chocolate. So there's food in her house, but she doesn't need that food to live. It's just because she likes the taste of something now and then, put something in her mouth. But she's not eating for calories. She's getting that from the prana. And I don't know if it was Dateline or some other folks. They challenged her to sort of test this, and they put her in like a motel room with no access to food. And Well, it didn't work out, as you might expect. But she had a reason for that. And it's because the motel was by a highway and there was pollution. And so she wasn't getting the right kind of energy coming into the room. But she still doesn't need food. So Emily has that question, can you do things sort of associated with pseudoscience for pleasure, as long as it doesn't hurt people? And I think the answer is yes, but you need to know that it's pseudoscience so that you don't get hurt. Because if you go and read one of her amazing books, you might end up like that Scottish teacher who died in a tent in the mountains where she was trying to soak up the prana, right? Because it doesn't actually work. And there's a question there about the legal implications. Can she be sued? And I would say I'm not a lawyer and I don't know. She's also Australian, and laws depend on jurisdictions. Yeah. So, and another feature, I think we've talked about it before, is that we can sort of disprove it, but then we just find a reason to keep believing it. There's also an over-reliance on the lowest level of evidence. There are levels of evidence. I have to remember that I don't have my good external microphone, and as soon as I turn away from my laptop, you won't be able to hear my voice anymore. I'm going to drag this a little closer while I write on the board. Oh, wait, no, I don't need to write on the board. I have this little e-board. I have a little pen here. So there's different levels of evidence, and so a pretty high level of evidence would be like an experiment. There's lots of ways that experiments are limited. You can't do a randomized control study for more than about a year because you just can't keep them going that long. The subjects drop out and they're extremely, I can't write. This is hard. Look, I'm trying to write experiment and with my mouse. This is really, okay, this is not working. There's levels of evidence. Experiments have the highest level of control and internal validity, and beneath that we have, say, case studies. That's what Sigmund Freud based his theories on. And at the absolute bottom, you would have anecdote. And here's an example of an anecdote. I was feeling depressed and I went to see this therapist that my friend recommended, and I'm feeling so much better now. The one in the middle is case study. Sorry, I'm covering that up too. And there's about 5 levels, but I forgot the other ones. So an anecdote could be, I took this weight loss pill and I lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks. Does that mean that the weight loss pill is effective? And chances like maybe, maybe not. Yeah, Hamid's onto it, right? There could be other variables that are causing it. So what else could have caused my 20-pound weight loss when I took that weight loss pill? Yeah, so as Emily suggests, I might have been exercising like mad. Maybe I was also starving myself. Yeah, maybe I have cancer. Maybe I'm lying. Maybe they paid me to say that. And now let's apply that to psychology. So I'm feeling really depressed. I went to this therapist, and now I'm feeling so much better. Did the therapy work? I was so depressed, saw this therapist, now I'm feeling great. Oh, but we think that it proves the therapy was effective. It's interesting. Yeah, it could be that I made other changes. So a strong predictor of depression is sleep deprivation. What if I just got a good night's sleep before that session or after that session? What if I made a new friend? Yeah, and so Jacob's comment, maybe the therapist gave you a plan that you could follow, and that worked. See how likely you guys are. You guys are on to the weight loss pill being kind of BS, right? But you're really believing in the therapy. I'm noticing you guys do that. It's an interesting bias. Most forms of therapy are not tested. Yeah, and there's a comment there that the people respond differently to different, practitioners. But it doesn't have to be that the therapy works. Your mood changes naturally over time. Your mood could have just gotten better on its own. Or maybe there was a change in your life circumstances, like maybe I got a new job and it's a better fit for me, right? Maybe it had nothing to do with the therapy. There's a good question. How can we measure the effectiveness of therapy without relying on anecdotes? And the answer is that you'd want more than one participant in this study. Maybe you'd like to have 100, and you would randomly assign about half of them to the therapy and half of them to, say, a wait list. And then you'd measure improvement in both groups. There have been studies like that, and they show that people in the control group improve as well. So if you go to see a therapist, it's because you're feeling really down, kind of on the floor where there's really nowhere to go but up. So people in the control groups improve as well. And then for the most evidence-based forms of therapy, there'd be like a stronger improvement. So on with the presentation. I'm going to try to make it to slide 40-ish today. One of our biases is a tendency to make connections. We have brains that are geared to finding connections. And so we have a tendency to see a connection when there isn't a connection. So if I say, I went to this therapy session and I feel so much better, you have a tendency to connect the two things, to say, oh, the therapy session must work and made you feel better. You also have a tendency to find faces in clouds and tree bark, right? There can be if we have just a random ordering of things, you have a brain that has evolved to easily find a face or what looks like a face in it. There's a part of your brain called the fusiform gyrus that's involved in face perception, and you will see faces in things that don't have faces because of that. And we have brains that that are always trying to work out what's going on in the world so that we make the next right action, and we have a tendency to see patterns. So things can happen to you that are pretty haphazard. You can be like, wow, this all adds up. It's fate, it's my destiny. And we have a tendency to do that. And there's an example there of what people thought was a face on Mars, and it's really just some shadows. Okay, it's an artifact of the way that the picture was taken, but people really ran with that face. And so, can pseudoscience be harmful? Well, yes. Anyone know what that picture is? It's a comet. This happened when I was young. I remember this in the news. I actually saw the comet. It's very pretty. It was was it maybe 1997? Does it look like there's something behind the comet? Yeah. Yes, Alexander. Do you remember this too? Yeah. Okay. So that tendency towards human patternicity, towards telling stories and wow, everything adds up, led some folks to believe that there was a spaceship coming behind the Hale-Bopp comet. So the Hale-Bopp comet is a comet that comes around the Earth every so many years, many years, but it looked from a picture like there was something behind it. And there were some folks that thought that there was a spaceship that was coming to take them to, a special place. And actually, what's behind that comet is just another star, but there was something to do with a software program that rendered this image and came up looking a bit spaceship-like. It was kind of the digital equivalent of a smudge on the lens. Okay. And they had a whole complicated theory of why this was the spaceship that was going to come and get them. And yes, so they very sadly committed mass suicide. There was, I think, over 30 people, and they thought that that spaceship would kind of pick up their souls. And you know, it's amazing. Their website is still up. If you go to heavensgate.com, you will find what the internet looked like to me when I was your age. Okay, like a flash website. And it's quite interesting to read it. And it's a really good example of mass delusion. I don't think we'll be talking about this in this course, but if you have a person who has delusional disorder, if they're also leaders, then their followers will join in the delusion. And even though those folks wouldn't have delusional disorder otherwise, they go along with it, and it becomes they become part of it. And so you have something called mass psychosis. Okay, so maybe they left 2 people to maintain the website. It's still there. I find that stunning. It's a fascinating website. There's some evidence that we have a tendency to believe suicide because we find some comfort in it. So experiments that remind us of death make us more likely to be interested, to say things like ghost stories. Right? Might bring us a sense of comfort. I'm reading Chance's comment that Heaven's Gate was on the tail of an acid boom, that people were excited and terrified about space in a way that we've never been exposed to before. Yeah, so it reflects things that are going on, cultural disorder. And I see a comment from Mika saying that there was a podcast on delusional disorder. Could you please send me that? Because I would be fascinated to listen to that. Sometimes we believe things because they resonate emotionally with us, but that doesn't mean that it's true. Sometimes we believe things because everyone else believes it. And you know, that makes sense as a heuristic. So when I'm in the airport and I have no idea where I'm going, I just follow the other people, right? Like sheep. And usually they know where they're going. They go to the take a booth or something. So you kind of rely on that. If we were in the room and I were to suddenly look this way, research shows that most of you would also look in that direction. And that's because maybe there's a saber-toothed tiger coming, right? Like it could be in your interest to do that. So we have a tendency to do what other people are doing. But, you know, maybe there was a time that everyone thought that the sun moved around the Earth. But the fact that everyone believes it doesn't make it true. And then we also have a tendency to believe that other people are subject to all these biases, but we are objective. We're not subject to them. And that's why it is so important, especially in psychology, which is sort of a more subjective science, to be aware of our own biases, to think about what they are, know what our social location and our positionality is. So, yeah, pseudoscience can be fun. I enjoy a little aromatherapy and chiropractic. And I know that the chiropractor is not going to cure my diabetes, and neither is any certain scent blend. It can do direct harm, as we saw in the Heaven's Gate example. There's also another really sad story. That little girl there, her name was Candace Newmaker, and she had some behavior issues. Oh, the patient has bad behavior. I believe that I'm not tremendously familiar with the case. I think she might have been through the foster care system. There were definitely some parenting issues there that, would have come up as a sort of behavior issue with her. And her mom went to see a doctor. Right? Good mom takes the child to the doctor, and the doctor made a referral to some therapists. And I mean, the right thing to do is to go along with the referral, right? And those therapists were practicing something called, rebirthing therapy. So in psychodynamic psychotherapy, the idea is that if you have some kind of behavior problem, it's because there's some unconscious conflict that's related to early childhood. And these folks believe that it had to do with the trauma of physical birth, of like going through the birth canal. That somehow you need to resolve that trauma before you can be free of it. And so they tried to mimic the birth process by wrapping this child in blankets and sitting on her. And she suffocated, right? They killed her. So it can be harmful directly. And they can also, you can also ask about opportunity cost. Does anyone know what opportunity cost means? Anyone who took economics? So if there's an opportunity cost, so there's a cost for you taking this course. I don't know how much your tuition cost, but then there's also the cost of everything you didn't do because you're here, right? You could be with your friends. You could be working a part-time job. There we go. Yes, just as Asher and Lucas and said, it's the cost of doing one thing over another. And it's not just the direct cost of doing things, not just the direct cost. It's the indirect cost of not having done all the other things you could have done that could have been better. So that's another risk of pseudoscience. And when you're in a sort of a pseudoscientific mindset, you're turning off your critical thinking abilities, right? You're taking your critical thinking hat off and going for the ride. And the ride can be fun, but sometimes it can be bumpy. Yes, I think Abdullah has it more accurately than I did as the value of the next best alternative. And then I see a comment from Emily about the Candace Newmaker case. Apparently, this therapy, the idea of this therapy session was a way to her to reconnect with maybe her birth mother. And I think it shows that the therapists had the best intentions. They were really actually trying to help. They believed what they were doing. But the good intentions, the fact that this idea is somehow understandable or relatable doesn't change the fact that it killed her. And thus we see the risks of pseudoscience. So if we're going to be scientists, we want to keep that critical thinking hat on. We want to stay skeptical. And what that means is that we actually want to be very open-minded. Right? We want to be open-minded to the idea that star signs could predict your personality. Or we don't scoff at things or dismiss them out of hand. We give them a fair trial and a good trial and see if they can pass it on their own merit. So this is not really about intuition or about emotion. It's about systematically collecting data, analyzing data, being aware of its limitations and our own biases when we interpret it. And there are 6 principles to critical thinking. So one thing that's really important to do, and you guys were doing it earlier when I was asking you about the weight loss pills and the therapy sessions, is that we need to rule out alternative, what they call rival hypotheses, which is other possible causes. So just like you were saying, maybe I didn't lose 20 pounds because of the weight loss pill. Maybe it's because I exercised like a fiend. Maybe it's because I starved myself and dehydrated myself. Maybe it's because I had cancer. So when we do an experiment, we try to control for all those other possible causes so that we can kind of reasonably believe that the only thing that was different between, say, the two groups in the study, those that were on the weight loss pill and those that weren't, was the weight loss pill, and that we've ruled out these alternative hypotheses. So that's why in a study we want something called a control group. It's important to understand the difference between correlation and causation. It is a fact that two variables are correlated. The inference that one variable is the cause of an increase in the other variable is an inference. There's a difference, and we have to be careful about jumping from one thing to another. So I trust that you guys have studied correlation in grade 12 math, and you know what I mean when I say correlation coefficient. I see a question from Kennedy. In the textbook, it said that while explaining confirmation bias, that just because some results occur doesn't mean the result of that study is a fact. You're mixing up fact and interpretation. The result is a fact. The interpretation of the fact might be wrong. And the way we rule out rival hypotheses, you never do it perfectly, is by designing an experiment with a control group. So you try to keep as many things the same as possible between the two groups, so that the only difference is the treatment. And then if the treatment works, you should see scores, say for depression, improve in the treatment group more so than they do in the control group. If they improved in both the treatment and the control group, it probably wasn't the treatment that helped. All right, so back to correlations. In case, I'm going to turn on my little laser pointer here. So in this middle graph, there's no correlation between variables A and B. So imagine that variable A is on the x-axis, and it ranges, say, from 0 to 100. And variable B is on y-axis, and it ranges from 0 to 100. And you just sort of see this cloud of points, and there's no correlation there. And that might be, let's say, your average test score and your shoe size. Okay, zero correlation. You could have a really big shoe size and get really high grades, or get really low grades and have a really small shoe size or a really big shoe size. Doesn't seem to be a relationship there. Now, there's an example of what we call a positive correlation. As one goes up, the other goes up. And we might see a strong positive correlation like this between your shoe size and your height. The bigger and longer your feet, the taller you are. Or you could have a negative correlation. And in this case, something goes down as your shoe size goes up. Maybe it's the amount of distance between your head and the ceiling. But we have to be careful about the causal inference. Sometimes things are correlated, and this strongly correlated because they're really measuring the same thing. Like when you have a perfect correlation of like 1.0, correlations range between -1 and 0.1. 0 is no correlation. And then like 0.1 would be like a teeny weeny splash of a positive correlation. 1.0 is a very strong positive correlation, the strongest. And then it follows the same principle on the negative side. But if two variables are correlated at 1.0, it's probably because they're measuring the same thing. So if your shoe size and your height are that correlated, maybe it's because they're both really measures of your height. But you would not see a perfect correlation between those two variables, because there's various reasons people can end up with small feet. I mean, maybe they had their feet, they grew up wearing shoes that were too small, and it cramped the growth of their feet, for instance. But on to correlation and causation. There is a correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks. Does that mean that eating ice cream makes you more attractive to sharks? No, says Chance. What could that be? Why can't I? We do this very naturally. We do this a lot. We assume that correlation implies a causation. Okay, and so what Emily and Mika have suggested there is the third variable problem, the C causes A and B. Okay, so heat causes an increase in ice cream sales, and heat also causes an increase in swimming, which causes the, gets more people bitten by sharks. When there really actually is a causal relationship and a correlation, you don't know which way it goes, right? The correlation between A and B is the same thing as the correlation between B and A. So you might not know if A causes B or B causes A or something else. C causes both A and B. One of the most important principles of scientific thinking is falsifiability and being willing to drop your theory once it's been pretty roundly falsified. So we need to have theories that actually can be disproven, and theories can never be proven, right? But there are some theories that can't be disproven because we build in these rationalizations that, oh, okay, if prophecy didn't turn out, it's because Mercury was in retrograde, that kind of thing. The ad hoc immunizing hypothesis, that's a lot of words to say the same thing. They make an argument in your book that a good theory is risky, that it would be easy to prove it wrong, but wow, you didn't, it's still standing. Now, we can see, let's say that you do a study on this kind of therapy, and it looks like there was a big improvement in people's depression scores, and we did a well-controlled study. Because of randomness, that could be a fluke. You could do a really well-controlled study on a therapy that actually doesn't work, and for reasons of chance, have the data look like it was really effective. You could see a large improvement in people. That can happen as a fluke. And so we need to replicate studies. In my other intro to psychology class, which I teach in person, I asked the students in the class if they were a representative sample of all humanity, because most scientific research is done on students like you. Now, I can't see you folks, but I can see the students in my in-person class. And there's 100 of them, and I asked them, do you think that you guys as a sample are a representative sample of global humanity? And I'm going to ask you guys the same question. You've seen each other in person in your in-person classes. Are you guys a representative sample of all of humanity? No, why not? Probably not. So one of the students put her hand up and she said, but you could take a random sample from all of humanity and end up with that group. And she's right, you could. But that might happen, the chance of that happening, very, very low. The chance of that happening over and over again, every time you took a random sample of 100 people from all of humanity, would be vanishingly small. Okay, a random sample of 100 people from all of humanity would include way more people who are Asian, who are Black, right? That was almost all white class, who folks there were mostly, 18, 19, 20. It would include people who were, over 30. It would involve way more people with disabilities. One of I can get really stuck in academia and really busy here. And sometimes when I've taken a break, one of the things that first really hits me about the rest of the world is how many people there are with disabilities. Because I just don't kind of see them in my milieu. Yes, and so you guys have all identified that you're not a representative sample of all of humanity because you're more class privileged, because you're younger, because you're probably whiter. You get these things. So that's another reason why replicability is important, because you could draw a sample like my intro psych class randomly. Yeah, it's possible, but it's vanishingly unlikely. If you were to repeat that experiment, it wouldn't happen again. Laws in physics can have amazing replicability. Think about the law of gravity. It doesn't really matter where you are. It doesn't matter who does it. It doesn't matter when they do it, yesterday, tomorrow, 3,000 years ago. Everything just falls down. I mean, it never falls up. And laws and principles in psychology don't have that level of reliability or anything close to it. Beware of extraordinary claims. Okay, is the evidence as convincing as the claims? Your book has something called Occam's razor. Sometimes there's a way simpler explanation for an amazing claim. Give the example of crop circles. Well, does that mean that an alien spaceship landed there because it looks alien spaceship shaped, or could it be a prank? So if you have an extraordinary claim, then there should be extraordinary evidence for that. So Occam's razor has its limitations. Think of it more as a guideline. It's not a logical proof. It keeps us from getting into overly elaborate theories with a lot of baggage and junk before we need to. So what's the more likely explanation for crop circles? Pranksters or spaceship landed there? Probably the pranksters. But that's not a logical proof. Okay, so be aware of the limitations of Occam's razor, but it's a good guideline that helps keep things lean and helps us from taking on extra assumptions. So I'm going to shift into talking about psychology's sort of history as a discipline. And psychology is a crossover discipline between philosophy and biology. And we may ask, sort of, philosophy of what? So there's, in the word psychology, you can see two morphemes. There are morpheme as the smallest unit of meaning. So psych and ology. What does ology mean? What does that morpheme mean? Yes, Gotham, it's the study of. Now it's the study of what? What's your first morpheme there? Something up here. The psyche. Yes, it's the study of the psyche. What is the psyche? The mind as conscious awareness is something that could be included in the psyche. It's not everything, because then there's an unconscious mind. Yes, it is the study of the psyche. Is the psyche the brain? Seems to be happening up there. So the psyche is the human soul, mind, or spirit. Psychology is a science, and we're talking about souls. philosophers spent hundreds of years trying to, figure out the difference between the mind and the soul, and the is this connected to the brain, or can it be independent from the body? I think there could be many theological views of what a soul is. I suppose a secular humanistic understanding of the term could be the unique kernel of your individuality. There's a you that has never lived before, will never live again, that is unlike any of the 8 billion people out there, right? So it's about you as a whole. But that's kind of the history of the discipline and what it goes back to. So I'm going to end today on a story, because we could also ask, who is psyche? And I remember that one of you was studying classics, okay? So in the ancient Greek myth, and please keep in mind that ancient Greek myths can be super misogynistic, she was a beautiful young woman, and she was condemned to certain doom by the jealous Aphrodite, who was the goddess of beauty. And so she was carried up to a rocky crag and left there to be sacrificed to a terrible dragon. But she was rescued by Aphrodite's own son. He's called Eros in Greek. You might be more familiar with the Latin name Cupid. And he sweeps her away to his garden, which is sort of like a paradise. Everything is wonderful in the garden. And, she's innocent, but this is an illicit union. Now, she's allowed to get some visits from her sisters in this story, and they are jealous of her circumstances, and they undermine her, right? And so she becomes filled with doubt, and they cajole her to do something that would betray Eros. He's asked her she's not allowed to look at him for some reason. And taking this bad counsel, she does something that betrays his trust. And honestly, I think it's pretty trivial. But he's an angry, insulted god and a man-child, and he casts her out. And there's a lot of narratives that have an idea of first there was a garden where everything was wonderful, then you get kicked out, and now you're on a journey. Okay. Yes, they did. Now, well, she did the wrong thing in that story, and she's sorry, and she hopes to redeem herself. But having nowhere else to turn, she asks his mom, oh no, that's Aphrodite, for help. It's not going to go well, is it? Because Aphrodite is the ultimate evil mother-in-law character. And Aphrodite has her handmaids. Sadness, custom, and worry torture Psyche. And these are the 3 torments. Because sadness can torment you, right? When you live in the past, and you can suck your agency away from the present, sort of sucks the color out of life. Custom can restrict you, right? Habits and traditions create this external pattern that you live by, and that can be helpful, that can be adaptive, but it can also block you, it can prevent your development. And worry takes you away from the present. It troubles you with imagined futures, it entangles you with fear, and you're less able to act effectively in the present. So all 3 of those torments reduce your ability to act adaptively. And so Aphrodite, who's really out to get Psyche, gives her 4 impossible tasks. And the first trial was to sort a basket of mixed grains overnight before daybreak. This comes up again 2,000 years later in the Cinderella story, and the birds help Cinderella sort lentils out of ashes. Well, kind of like that, ants arrive to help Psyche, and gets at the idea that little by little, like through small coordinated actions, you can achieve something that once seemed overwhelming to you. And many hands make light work. So one way you can get through a seemingly impossible trial is to sort of break it up into manageable little pieces and let others help. And now we are at 10:20, and we will continue the story next time. We made it to